Yay. All right. We are so excited to have Alex here today. Thank you so much for taking the time to meet with us. For folks who don't know Camille Ricketts, she is a dear friend of RenCo, and I got a little intro from her. So the way that Camille describes Alex is he's one of the most accomplished marketing leaders working in software today, with enormous expertise and wisdom to share about B2B marketing. Lucky for the world, he generously shares so much of what he knows at his blog, Kracov.co, where he gets incredibly tactical. I've spoken with so many people about how helpful Alex is to everyone he knows, and I always hear the same thing about him. Alex is a learning machine. I've never seen anyone grow as fast in their career, end quote. Could not be better said. It's not easy to scale as fast as a company like Lattice, but he's continued to pioneer more and better marketing efforts. All the time, I go to lattice.com to see the new dimensions of marketing strategy that inspire and help me. So extremely incredible accolades from Camille, who is no slouch herself. And like I said, we're just so excited to have you, Alex, and to learn how you've pulled this off. And I know folks here will be eager to follow in your footsteps with whatever kind of repeatable formula you've been able to extract from your own experiences. So maybe we can just start off a bit. Of course, you didn't come into the world fully formed as a marketing genius. So maybe you want to just give us some background on what you were doing before Lattice, how you ended up there. For folks who missed it in Slack, the sort of loose format that Alex and I were thinking about was sort of something like, how do you even wind up in the position where you can get a bigger and bigger container for yourself to grow into? Like, how do you do that? That is a skill in and of itself. And then what do you do once you get there? Like, you've been given the container, and now, as Camille was saying, you have to become a learning machine in order to keep up. So how do you do that? And then chapter 3 is sort of like going a little bit deeper on anything marketing specific and or just generalist to specialist, sort of thinking about your skills along that continuum. And I would like to give Alex at least 20 or so minutes to just kind of make sure we get through all of the great ideas that he wants to share with us. And then we'll have a conversation, and that will be super fun. Also, P.S. Lattice is hiring, so keep that in mind too. All right, Alex, welcome.
Awesome. Thank you so much for the intro. Yeah. Very, very excited to be here. So hopefully I can live up to the hype. But yeah, it's been quite a journey to kind of get to where I am today. So I'll give you like the 30-second background of my career. We can kind of go from there. So for me, like the easy path in life, funny enough to say, was just to be a lawyer. Both my parents were lawyers, and that was kind of all I knew. So like when I went to college, I was like, I'm gonna be a lawyer because that's like, you go to college, you go to law school, you have a good salary, and that was like all that there was for me. It was like, that's kind of what I thought. And then I guess somewhere through college, I was like, I want to figure out what internet business is. Like, I want to figure out how you make money online. And I don't really know why I had that epiphany. Maybe it was like, Facebook was kind of blowing up at the time, just everything that was going on in the world. But I got really inspired by the internet, and I was in this kind of weird spot where I was like a political science major. I was kind of on this law school path, and I was like, okay, how do I pivot my career into internet business, whatever that actually means? Because I didn't know at the time. Still trying to figure it out. And when you try and pivot into like business from like maybe liberal arts, I had to really focus more on like soft skills. So like marketing was easier, right? It was easier to do that than to go get an accounting degree or finance degree. And I'm not super analytical. I don't have like strong math skills. So that's kind of what I started to do in college, and I got an internship and was figuring out. But honestly, when I got to the end of my college experience, I was like, oh shit, I have to get a job. Like, what am I going to do? But I wasn't quite sure. And I just focused on that goal of like internet business. So the place where I went to get a job, Yelp, and I went and was an SDR, like junior account executive at Yelp. And I don't know how familiar y'all are with the Yelp sales culture, but it's very much kind of like factory culture, like large classes of people. And I think I basically lasted about 11 months doing that. And I realized like sales wasn't quite for me, but I got lucky enough at kind of at the end of that where I got an internship at this place called Blue State Digital, and they were a marketing agency. And they were a marketing agency that was kind of famous for electing like Obama. So they ran his digital campaigns. And I was an intern there and was able to, long story short, kind of work my way up the accounts team there. So working the client relationships and kind of being a project manager in marketing world. And I got to run the Google account eventually, which got me closer to technology and that internet business idea that I was passionate about. That's what brought me out to California. And I did that for a couple of years. And it was a lot of fun. I got to work on like Google Fiber city launches. That was probably one of the funnest things. And I got to work on all these kind of like political advocacy campaigns where Google's lobbying the government for various things. So that was interesting. And then I was kind of at this crossroads where I was like, I don't know if I want to like have an agency career. I got into business school. I was like, do I go do that? And I kind of got lucky with Lattice. I was like, I'm in San Francisco. I got into business school. I was like, all I want to do is go work at a startup. That was really important to me. And my roommate at the time was actually the first employee at this company called Lattice. He had basically stalked the founders, Jack and Eric, from the previous company, Teespring, and joined. And I got really lucky and joined Lattice. Long story short, as like the third employee. And so since then, have gone from a team of like 5 people at Lattice and the only marketer to now we're about over 200 people. We have like 15 people on the marketing team. And for those of you, and Lattice, if you don't know what Lattice is, so we sell like people management software, so SaaS, B2B business. We do things, performance reviews, one-on-ones, goals, engagement surveys. So it's software to really help with all those things. We believe like people strategy is business strategy, and the best way to grow your business is to invest in your people. So we've raised like almost $100 million in venture capital, customers like Slack and Pinterest, big names in tech. So yeah, that's kind of the whirlwind on my story and my background.
Amazing. And so going a little bit deeper into the cracks of like what were obviously like, as you said, you got lucky because your roommate was working there. But was it just as easy as like, yo, bro, I want to work at your startup? Or were there other elements that you brought in from your background or other things that you had been doing in the background that helped you to prove that beyond just living with your friend, you would drive value for the company?
Yeah. So like the exact moment, I like did a lot of pre-work that kind of set up myself for luck, right? And so was like no startup is really going to hire you because you have nothing to offer. You have like no real skills in the marketplace. And so I got this advice that was like, you need to go pick a skill and get good at something. And for me, that was marketing. And I, kind of had this flirt with sales, and I was like, well, do I like this? But at the end of the day, I had spent, 4 or 5 years getting really good at marketing and understanding what that looked like at a big company level. So I think that was one piece. I think along the way, I was always kind of playing around with random things on the internet and trying to do little side hustles. Like I was like whether in like life or my job, I would try and start some sort of little company. Again, I was obsessed with trying to figure out internet businesses. So when I was at Yelp, I was like scheming to create like a dog treat delivery business, and it was a complete failure, like barely off the ground. But I learned about like a little bit about supply chain, and I like learned how to build like a WordPress site, and and figured out how to use like Upwork to get a design, and like those skills, funny enough, at the time I was like, I'm wasting my money and time, like my initial reaction. But when I look back, that's actually what made me successful at Lattice. So different things like that. And I also like learned how to use design tools like Sketch was really helpful. And so, I think I did a lot of things to set myself up. And one of actually just moving to San Francisco. That was a big kind of leap of faith. I'm from the East Coast. All my family's on the East Coast. And so moving here and trying to build a network, I think really helped to position me. And I think that's somewhat less true today, especially in remote, and we're all on Zoom and it doesn't really where you are. But I think there's things you can do to like hang out online in the places where, other startup founders are, or whatever you want to be doing. Like the communities are online in digital formats now. You don't have to always be in person, especially, over the past year. So yeah, I think those are a couple of the things that like helped position me, even though the moment was lucky. I think I like put myself in a position, and then when I finally kind of worked up the courage to ask mine, like he's excited of joining, and I'm like, do I want to step on his toes? I really jumped when he said yes. I really jumped on the opportunity and kind of like made like a really big marketing plan to figure, to present to Jack, who is our founder, and then it kind of worked out from there.
It's yeah, it's really funny that the things that you thought were a waste of time end up like, it's funny how those things can kind of come back around. And I'm wondering, like along those same lines of sort of side hustle, you have a blog. When did you start blogging?
Yeah, so this is me trying to practice what I preach and do this again for, I'm still young in my career, still young, so trying to do this. So I've started blogging earlier this year. For a long time, I've wanted to just document what I've been doing at Lattice. I think writing is a great way. Honestly, it's like kind of selfish, like it's for myself for the most part. It's like I have ideas that I want to capture and I want to remember, and writing them down. And the best way to like figure out the way you think about something, I think, is writing. That really, like, the more you write, the better you think. And so I'm really trying to work on that, like preparing for this conversation. Like it was really easy because a lot of the stuff like can come from my blog, and it's a really interesting like way to get better at your thinking. But I think also it helps to kind of show your thinking to the world, and it can really help you get jobs and opportunities because other people, it's like the best resume. Like LinkedIn is a very outdated way to think about someone's resume. If you can create an awesome website, if you want to switch careers, if you want to kind of do anything now, like publish something online, and that will force you to get good at the thing you want to get good at, but also help you attract other people. So that's kind of what I'm doing with my blog, is I want to, get better at B2B SaaS, and for whatever I do next in my career and at Lattice, that's like a helpful thing for me to get better at. And the blog's the vehicle.
What have some of the results of sharing your work publicly been? Like there's obviously, there has to be some kind of reward for the potential embarrassment that you subject yourself to when you publish your thoughts online. So what is it that's kept you doing it?
Yeah. A couple of things. I think one, you get to meet interesting people. I have, because of the blog, I think it gives you credibility in the way you think and maybe in the specific area and domain. And as a result of that, and like Twitter too, like the combination of those two things, you can meet really interesting people in your space that I think I wouldn't have met otherwise. And I think that's a huge value. I've gotten like a bunch of consulting. I did like a consulting gig off of it, and have gotten other offers. So there's also even like financial incentives there too that come inbound, and so that's really nice. And then there's just this positive feedback loop, honestly, of like you publish something and you get those results, whether it's like likes on Twitter or page views or whatever, and it just feels good. Like it's cool to make something and have other people read it. And what's funny about my journey at Lattice is I was, in the early days when it was just me, I was like very much just a maker. Like I was like headphones on, was doing stuff on my computer. And now I'm very much a professional manager. I sit in meetings and I talk to people and I make decks and stuff. And so the blog in some ways is my own personal outlet to get back to that kind of creator side that I really, really do love.
I'm going to read this question from Nadia because it's on this topic. She wanted to know who you write for. Like you were mentioning that it's helpful to clarify your own thoughts. When you sit down to write a blog post, and maybe it changes, like how often are you just like trying to clarify something for yourself versus trying to write for a specific audience? Nadia, jump in if I butchered your question.
Cool. I write for myself, and then I also write for like Alex of 4 years ago. And so I really want to help like the next generation or someone in my shoes, because basically what happened, I don't really know anything about SaaS. I don't know anything about MQLs or any of this like stuff, and I have to figure it out. And so I look at like the audience for this blog as me trying to figure it out, and for whoever that next person under 12 opportunities in pipeline. Oh, my back.
You're back. you're back.
Okay. But yeah, helping me from a couple of years ago is the main answer. And so founders and early stage marketers.
That's such a great segue to back to Alex of 4 years ago. Do you want to tell us a little bit about what the journey at Lattice has been like in terms of that transition from, like you were saying, headphones on maker to now running a team? Like, what I loved that Camille pointed out that like you're really good at learning. So I think it would just be super valuable to all of us to hear, like, how did you manage your own learning to keep pace with each of those successive jumps?
Yeah. So I feel like my job at Lattice changed maybe every 6 to 12 months. And the tricky part is no one tells you your job is changing. It's just changing and you have to kind of survive and do it. And so the kind of stages that I think through days where it's just me and I'm like just trying to get really good at marketing and doing stuff on my computer and like running ads myself and writing blog posts myself and standing at a conference booth myself. And so that's kind of phase one. And then you start to build this like little team, right, is phase two. And so I kind of move from just only a player to a place I start working with like a freelance designer, and we eventually hire 2 full-time people. And so then I'm learning to not only do a lot of the marketing myself for the first time. Like I had kind of done a little bit in the past as a project manager, but not as like an official people manager. So that was kind of phase two. And then phase three, I go from player coach to professional manager where, okay, I'm just really managing people all day. And now the phase I'm in is like being a manager of managers, which is a very different muscle. And this has all happened over the course of like four years for me. And so I think my learning at each stage has been really different. In the early days, I really had to wrap my head around the industry. So I love the movie The Matrix, and there's the scene in The Matrix where they like download information into someone's like the brain, and Neo's like, I can like fly a helicopter now. And I always thought like podcasts are kind of like that, where if I just listen to podcasts and immerse myself in the industry every day to work on the way home from work when I used to commute to work, that was like how I could understand things. And so between like podcasts, Aster, listening to webinars, reading blogs, just soaking in all the information on the internet, like I was able to slowly understand like what's happening in the world. And then that's piece one, is like internet resources. Piece two was talking to other marketers who were like a stage ahead of me. And so I would constantly try and get on the phone and network with people who, okay, when I was a seed stage startup, talk to Series A people, Series A, talk to Series B, and like try and figure out, okay, what am I not thinking about? And then, you know, you have this imposter syndrome the whole time. You're like, I don't actually know what I'm doing. But then over time, through more of those conversations, you start to realize that you actually do know what you're doing. And that's a cool feeling.
And how did
and
you
then on
find those
the,
people? Did you just like, were you just like cruising LinkedIn looking for Series B
yeah.
PMMs, or what was the strategy?
Sometimes, yeah. Really trying to just work through networks. Like I would bother our founder and be like, hey, you know, set me up with somebody. Or in the course of a marketing conversation, like that's how I know Camille too. We just like, you just kind of can bump into people, and you'll find that, you know, in most tech businesses, people are very willing to talk about stuff. So I would even, you know, talk to competitors or frenemy, like partners, and say, you know, try and work with them on something. And then, you know, we'd be working to plan a webinar, but then I'd also ask them all these random questions about their marketing program. And so you just kind of like every moment you get, just try and have more conversations with people. And then there was this point where it's like my job wasn't really about being really good at marketing. It's about being a good manager. And that was a tough transition. And one is just a mindset shift that I really had to go through, where it's like, okay, I'm not clicking the buttons all day anymore. I need to coach people and develop people and think about org structure and focus on hiring. I had a really good, our COO, Jay Zach Stein, is a fantastic people manager and was a great mentor to me through some of that phase. So I would say like the internal team around you can be your big big resource there. And then there also became this kind of moment at Lattice where it was like, hey, can Alex go all the way? Like, can he, we have these crazy growth goals, can he scale into like VP and and beyond? And I got a coach. I started working with this guy Francois, who had been a senior marketer at LinkedIn and was a CMO at Twilio and a couple other places. And I think he really helped to professionalize me. Like, how do you talk to a board? How do you work with an executive team and things like that? And yeah, it's just this constant journey of growth, and it's like that's the fun part. If you're not uncomfortable, you're not growing. That's kind of how I think about it.
And how did you work with the founders through this? Like, what did you do to build trust with them so that they were even interested in giving you these opportunities? And how did you manage up so that this all like worked out?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think like Jack is our founder, and I guess I had, because I joined so early, I got to work really closely with him early on, like literally sitting next to him. And I think the way I really like the way you earn trust changes over time. In the early days, it's just about like horsepower and doing stuff. Like, I was able to come in and show him that even if I wasn't doing everything perfectly right, I was able to do a lot that was like pretty good. Like, on my own, I could set up a website or create a pitch deck or design a graphic or write a blog post or help a lot of different things. And he could just immediately see some of that value I was creating for the business. And I think through that, the like close communication, right? Maintaining in lockstep and just sharing my logic around different decisions. I think, especially in marketing, there's so many different programs, there's so many different directions you can take things, and just being extremely transparent with how I'm thinking about something, why, and then also being open to feedback and being able to change what I was thinking. I think those constant loops, and the more loops you go through with your manager or founder or whoever's your boss, can really help you. And then I think it's important to like prioritize in public, and again, show your thinking. And so, I would say, here's the 10 marketing priorities we could work on. We're only going to work on 5 of them. And here's why. And I think even if you're wrong, showing your thinking and having those conversations can really help you go far. And then maybe another thing I'll say is, like, you need to close your loop on big decisions. And so when you have big moments or a place of disagreement or something that you're really advocating for, you're going to spend a lot of money, being able to close the loops with data, even if it's like, I literally sent an email to close a loop on something from like 2 years ago this week, because I think it's important to show trust in that you as a person are constantly thinking about these things. And then you got to pick your battles. Like, you can't make everything a big problem or a big thing. You have to kind of pick your spots at times as well, and pick what's most important.
Well, we wanted to talk a little bit about sort of how you think about how you made the shift from go-to-market generalist to, really marketing, B2B marketing specialist. So I don't know if you want to offer like any sort of anecdotes around that. And then we've got so many great questions. I think we'll just turn it into a conversation from there.
Yeah. And I know this is a community of generalists, and I think and I think of myself as very much a generalist. Like marketing is kind of what I fell into, but I really like business and a lot of different things. And even within marketing, I would describe myself as a generalist. Like, I am not I'm not the best copywriter. I'm not the best designer. I'm not the best ads person, but I can like effectively do those things and talk about some of those things. I think the role of a generalist can really vary depending on the type of startup. Like, a generalist at SpaceX is going to do really different things than like a generalist at Lattice. And what's interesting about the generalist role is, I think, you early on in a startup, but over time, companies naturally move towards a specialist model where you get people who are really good at like paid ads or whatever the thing is. I think as a generalist, you need to pick a specialty. You can be a generalist within an area, but you can't show up at a company and be like, I'm a generalist, like, help, hire me. That only really works if you have a personal network, if you know the person and they trust you. And then they're like, okay, like, that's how Jazak, our COO, basically got hired at Lattice. Like, he has done a lot of things. He's been a principal, he's led product teams. Like, he's done a lot of random things, but he really knew Jack, had a personal relationship, and can do a lot of different things across Lattice, and he really has done that effectively. So I think my best advice for a generalist is like pick a specialty or a general area you want to play in, and that could be a function like marketing, it could be an industry like SaaS, but you want to start developing some skills to make yourself a little bit more marketable there. And I think commonly what I hear is like generalists want to work in operations. Like operations is the main pathway at startups, and like I think at some companies that can be pretty vague, like operations can mean a lot of things, but like at Lattice, operations means a very specific things. It's like a combination, for example, or helping us with our marketing automation system. So
I think you cut out for that last part. I don't
Oh.
know if we heard what you said. Operations means at Lattice.
Oh, yeah, sorry about that. So operations at Lattice means, and pretty much most SaaS companies, it's a very specific thing where you're like helping administer the systems and understand the data and the financial modeling and the software. And so it means getting like really good at Salesforce, for example, which might not, is like not everyone's cup of tea. I don't know how much you've been in the back end of Salesforce, but it's not too fun, at least in my opinion. So some rough advice.
It's a specific type. It's a specific type of tea, an acquired taste, you might say.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
Okay. Well, Jen has been busily making sure that we have everybody's questions. So we've themed them. So we've got a couple questions back to sort of your bio, Alex, and you personally. A few more questions on your blog, questions about Lattice, questions about leadership. We've got way more than we can probably cover in 30 minutes. But let's just start back at the top. Christian, I don't know if you want to ask this is such a great question. If you want to hop in, Christian, and ask your question about just kind of recognizing your strengths and weaknesses and how to be like, I don't know, just how to develop self-awareness about your superpowers, it sounds like. Go ahead.
Yeah, that's basically the whole thing. I loved how you said, hey, I'm great at, or hey, I'm not so great at math or whatever. So how did you learn that about yourself? And then on the opposite side, what are your superpowers and how did you learn those?
Yeah, it's a good question. I guess the best way I figure it out is just by trying things, and like I try something and then I try and compare myself to peers and other people who I think are really good at it and try and assess myself that way. I do a lot of introspection too. Like I think I am a pretty analytical person, and like oftentimes at night, like coming home after a hard day at Lattice or whatever, I will like through my brain like replay the events of a day or a moment. Like after this conversation, I'm sure I'll replay like what I said and shouldn't say, and I'll even do that like certain emails and stuff. And so I think it is just constantly asking yourself how you can be better at specific things. Things I'm good at, it's really hard for me to know that I'm actually good at them. And I think figuring that out really takes someone else telling me that. And it really it took me a long time to realize I was like pretty good at B2B SaaS and pretty good at marketing. And that only came from like talking to other marketers or other people who are supposed to be really good at something. And I'm like, oh wait, I know as much as them. And that's cool. And so yeah, it's not a like linear process. It's hard.
Alex, I'm curious how much of that too was, because it's interesting that you're saying like it came from you hearing other people talk about it and then realizing like, oh, actually, I know something about this. Like, do you think that how much of that was like you kind of having to overcome your own imposter syndrome?
Yeah.
Versus just like having an innate ability at this?
Yeah, no, it was exactly that. Like I've never done this before. I never worked at a SaaS company. So there's a lot of imposter syndrome. And then people even, I've had a lot of heart to hearts with Jack, see the founder and say, like, can you do this? Do you know what you're doing? And, I was like, oh, my track record shows that I do know what I'm doing and I'm going to get there. But, it gets scarier. And the thing about these high growth companies is the stakes get bigger and bigger and bigger. Like the amount of budget and stuff I have to deal with gets scarier and scarier. The targets get scarier. The amount of people that you're responsible for gets scarier. And so, yeah, you just have to embrace imposter syndrome. And the thing I would always tell myself is like, Obama was never like president before he was president, right? Like he was a smart guy who figured it out. And I think we all are like that. Like everyone in the world is just trying to figure it out, and we're all smart people, and you just like, you just have to embrace that challenge.
Growth mindset.
Yeah.
On that salient interlude, Mishti, you had a question for Alex about what Alex of today is struggling with. I don't know if you want to elaborate on that.
Sure. Sorry, I was eating dinner, so I had my video off. But you said that you write partly for Alex of 4 years ago. So I'm wondering what Alex of today is thinking about that 4 years from now you might, reflect on.
A lot of it's like just team building. Or something. Am I back?
We lost,
I think it froze
we
for a
lost you,
second.
Alex. You're back. Yes.
I think I'm back now. Okay, sorry. The marketing team is going to grow about 9 people, and so a lot of what I'm thinking right now is like org structure and hiring and team processes. And every time you add that many people and the company grows, things change, and you really have to like update how you do things. So that's something I am directly responsible for. There's no one on the marketing team who can do that other than me, and so that's like very top of mind, especially as we go through 2021 planning. From a more marketing perspective, we as a business are trying to move up market, so we're moving from like SMB and more inbound motion to more enterprise and outbound, and we're trying to get really good at that. And we're trying to really scale our account-based marketing engine and how we do that program. And that's been a story for a couple of years now, but we like really need to get good at next year.
I'm curious to connect those 2 points to, like you were saying, just how you have never had to do this before. And then it's like, you're not the only one who knows that, as you're saying, like your boss knows that too. So I'm just curious, as there are these like bigger and bigger and scarier things, how have you navigated some of those conversations where it's like somebody is asking this thing of you that you're not even sure you can do?
Yeah. I think it kind of goes back to that showing your thinking and transparency and just being really thoughtful, like and constructing an argument. So I think a lot of times when I'm trying to do something that's new and something we haven't done before, I will kind of go back to my consulting days and like make a deck or a memo or a brief and try and pull in outside resources to really help me there. And to like construct. I think one of the other benefits of having a coach, especially like a domain expertise coach like Francois, who has done it before and like has been CMO at Twilio and director at LinkedIn and stuff like that, is it gives me someone to bounce idea off of and be like, am I crazy? Am I thinking about this in the right way? And in some ways, I think it backs me up and gives me a little bit more legitimacy. And I'm in a very privileged and fortunate position to like be able to have a coach, and like Lattice helps pay for that. And that's something, a kind of a mutual agreement between the company and myself. But that has been really helpful over the past couple of years.
Valentin, you have a question that was related to what Alex was just talking about. Do you want to hop in?
Sure. So you've mentioned that top of mind for you is managing your org structure as it develops and as your team grows. And I'm wondering, what have been the challenges that you've faced in growing your team, and how have you approached them?
Yeah. So the biggest challenge that you have, and this is my team and honestly any startup team and org structure, is when you have like high performers on your team, right? Like hopefully if you're doing well, there's a lot of people who are doing a really good job on your team. But as the company grows, that employee growth might not be able to keep up with the company. And that goes for myself too. And so when you go, let's say, from being a 5-person marketing team to a 100-person marketing team overnight, and you need to lead that team, the skills are really different. And so what happens is you have to like start layering high performers. You have to bring in outside help in some ways, people who have done it before. And I think on a personal level, that can feel really weird for people because they're working really hard, they're high performers, they are doing really well, but in some ways it's just not quite enough because the company is growing so fast. And so as you're managing the org structure and you're starting to bring in more outside leaders, that can get a little bit weird and awkward on a personal level and some change management, but it is just the name of the game when it comes to startups. And it oftentimes it's really good for the person who's getting layered as well because they get to learn from a domain expert and someone who actually knows what they are doing. And on the flip side, like the best moves I've made at Lattice have been bringing in really senior talent to lead different functions on the marketing team, because that allows me to get out of the day-to-day, and then I have a real true owner who knows what they're doing.
You find that high performers tend to be receptive to being layered or bringing in a new person they're collaborating with regularly, or does there tend to be resistance, or is it totally a person-to-person thing?
Yeah, I think for the most part, people, like, it is person to person, but in my experience, people have been really receptive to it, because I think like the common thing that will happen, I think Elad Gil, who's like an angel investor, tells this story or anecdote of like, okay, you're the designer of a product, you're the first designer at anything. You go from designing the entire product to you start hiring all these designers, and then you go from not designing the whole product, but just like a little piece of the product. And that feels really weird in the short run. But if you kind of hang around long enough and you keep investing in your growth, then, flash forward, a couple of years later, you might be managing a 15-person team within that like product area. And I think that's kind of like the dream of a startup. Now, it doesn't always work out perfectly like that, but I think most people at least you build enough trust in your team and the org, and you focus on like learning and helping people grow their careers and their skills. And I've often found that they're okay with that, at least in the short term.
On the topic of evaluating people's performance, which is what Lattice helps folks do, Jeremy, you had a question about reviews and feedback and that being a tax. Do you want to hop in?
Sure. Let me read up because I think I framed it. Yeah. Well, first off, thanks for your very candid and thoughtful replies to stuff. Your awesome job so far. Yeah, I was just curious about the Lattice specific question, and that you're in like the employee happiness and performance reviews and stuff. So oftentimes in organizations, like performance reviews and feedback are like busy work or like a tax. It's like you have to do this also every 6 months, yearly. It's, everyone's just like, it's just a pain in the ass. Like people at Facebook are like, okay, hey, they have to spend like more than 50% of their time because you're always in some performance review cycle. I've heard this from friends. So just curious about your insights on how to make employees more excited or to view this stuff as like a value add, and trying to get employees or even managers looking at this stuff as like leaning in versus just being like apathetic that it's just a tax on top of whatever it is you're supposed to be doing otherwise.
Totally. Great question. This is basically like, this is like the Lattice pitch, if you will. I think from an employee perspective, like the thing to understand about performance reviews and any of these kind of moments is that feedback is a gift, right? Like constructive feedback is the only way you're going to grow your career. And, people just telling you you're doing, like if people don't tell you in the moment when you're doing something wrong and they're not giving you constructive ways to get better, you will keep doing wrong things forever until someone stops you. And so I think from an employee mindset, you need to approach every performance review conversation or any moment with your manager as that feedback is a gift. And that's how you're going to get better at your career, and not being like, it's really easy to be defensive too oftentimes, but just taking that feedback and understanding it and internalizing because it's coming from a place. I think what we try and do at Lattice is move people from, and I think most companies have moved, at least in kind of tech, from an annual performance review to a continuous performance management cycle. And so the idea is that you're not just waiting for that December performance review to get feedback. You are having these conversations all year long. And there's like no surprises in a performance review, right? Like you should be meeting with your manager weekly to talk not just about project work. Like your one-on-ones like should not be about project work. They should be about you. It is the employees meeting. You should be driving the agenda, and it should all be about how you can get better. And that it can be about navigating different roadblocks, about your personal development and things like that. And the idea is that you're constantly doing that every week, every day, and that when it comes time for a performance review, it's really just a simple kind of look back and summary and a moment of reflection. And in the same way I was kind of talking about how great writing is for the blog, I think it's really good in a review as well. We also try and decouple reviews, and we recommend from comp cycles as much as possible, because I think reviews, when it's tied to comp and your title, can feel really scary and it feels real high pressure, and that's when you're most defensive. And so we think the most effective way to have a great performance review is to really just be focused on the feedback. And then with Lattice and tools like Lattice, we try and make it more lightweight. So it's not just this long thing you have to do. It could be a really short survey you fill out or things like that. So it's kind of a little bit of how we think about it.
Super quick follow-up. So I'm totally on the side of, being product and working with engineering of, radical transparency, radical candor, and just, honest feedback, like helps people, feedback being a gift. What I've heard from other friends, senior, like otherwise, I don't know if it's, just kind of the onset of, maybe it's cancel culture, maybe it's something else, but like with Gen Z, maybe it's millennial, but there's this kind of like rising tide concept that, honest feedback or things that, hurt people's feelings can result in them feeling like they're bullied, or that it's like a harsh, work environment, and then, like complaints to HR or like stuff like that. So it definitely feels like this is more something that's happening, now versus 10 years ago. And I'm just curious, how you guys as kind of a focal point in employee happiness, are kind of like handling that.
Yeah. I think when you think about giving feedback, it really comes down to building a relationship with that other person. And so it would be pretty awkward on this call, right, if I gave anybody feedback, right? Because I don't really know anyone here, and that feels weird. But like with people on my team, I focus on building a relationship. I focus on like really getting to know them on a professional and personal level, and they really know that I care and they trust me. And you have to build those steps first in order to be really candid and clear with people. And I think I focus on doing that with my team and my direct reports, but I think there's also a culture you can set up across the company level where, people need to understand that feedback is coming from a good place. Now, that doesn't mean you have to be thoughtful about the way you give feedback as well. You can't just be kind of a jerk about it. You have to be really kind of thoughtful and caring. And it's like at the high level, there's this air cover around the culture of trust, and then building relationships one-on-one with people is kind of I think the most important piece of it.
Got it. Thank you for the thoughtfulness.
Ayana had a follow-up question. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Sorry, a follow-up question in regards to leveraging your weekly meetings. I think the tip you gave is actually pretty solid, but I was wondering, what is your guidance around how employees can encourage or somehow encourage their managers to kind of play the mentor role, especially as it relates to, improving personal or professional development, leveraging whatever insights and resources that they have that can actually be a benefit to the employee taking the next step in their career.
Gotcha. So so it's like, how can I push the manager to focus on my career development? It's kind of the
I think, because the one thing I definitely participating in different types of performance reviews. I think people for the most part are comfortable giving feedback, but when it comes to actionable feedback in terms of like what the manager can tangibly do, can support you with the areas that they think that you need to improve on. I think that's where the gap is. So I don't know if you yourself have experienced that, and if you got any tips around that.
Yeah, no, it's definitely a very common thing. And I think, in a very idealistic scenario, it is happening from the tops down, and the leadership team believes this, is pushing it to the managers. And I think depending on the organization, there are some mechanisms for employees to be more bottoms up, like an engagement survey to share some of that feedback. But regardless, if it's not happening tops down, I think the advice I would give for an employee is just to be extremely proactive with your manager. And like, every conversation, or where it's most appropriate, is to keep bringing up growth. And I think one really tangible trick to do this is to create a growth plan or development plan. And so I think a lot of companies really do OKR goal setting process, but it's all focused on the project side. Like, I'm going to hit this revenue goal, or I'm going to launch this thing. And I think what you can do as an employee is say, here are the 3 things I want to work on. And then you work with your manager to kind of figure out the pathways to do that. So like for me, one example of something I want to work with my manager was get better at like management by numbers. And so what I would do is kind of set up like an OKR where I have like my objective, get better at management by numbers. And then I kind of outlined all these different projects and streams of work to help me get there. And that was something I proactively brought up in every meeting, pulling up a Google Doc, or now you can actually do this in Lattice, and have these growth plans. And I think that's a really tangible way that you can push your manager to help you and use them as kind of a resource. But yeah, I mean, it's hard. I think career development is really also on the manager's there to be a coach and a guide, but it's on the employee being proactive and really pushing it forward. So that's one way you could do it.
Thank you.
We have so many great questions, and I'm afraid we're not going to get to all of them. So sorry, guys, if we don't get to you. Christian, you have a quick question, hopefully, about how to select an HR tool. And
I can be more concise too. Yeah.
I think more broadly, there's maybe a question in there about like, how do you differentiate? How do you as a marketer think about differentiation in the crowded marketplace of HR tools?
Yeah. So I guess how do you pick an HR tool? It really depends on the problem you're trying to solve. There's a crazy amount of HR tools out there. So are you trying to do core HR like HRIS, benefits, payroll, that sort of thing? Are you trying to be more on the front end like people management? And Lattice's world is recruiting. So I would start with the problems you have, figure out the vendors. And then I think the truth with most SaaS is that different providers work for different company segments. And so if you are super enterprise, you might go work with Workday. But if you are more SMB mid-market, you might come work with Lattice. So look at the problem and your size of company. Differentiation is a really tricky thing and is something that constantly keeps me up at night. So you can differentiate via product, and we have done that at different times at Lattice. But I think what we found is that people will catch up. So you can differentiate for like 6 to 12 months, but then if it's a good idea, people will build the same thing. You can differentiate with like your look and feel and presence in the market, which I think we've continually done. We kind of came in and with a pretty premium design and a different look and feel, and that has gone a long way. And you can differentiate with your go-to-market strategy. We do a lot of different things in Lattice. Like we were doing virtual conferences and webinars and stuff before it was cool. That was like one way we were doing it. Or we've done crazy direct mail campaigns, or we have a Slack community. There's a lot of things that you can do to differentiate in the way that you reach your audience and the way you engage with them.
Nice, cruising. Nadia had a question back to sort of like leadership. How, Nadia, I'll let you jump in.
So I think one thing that you mentioned a little bit back was just around like picking your battles as a leader. And I think that's something that like I've heard many times sort of over. I work at Lyft, and I think that's something that's true for leaders there too. But I think on the other hand, like especially as you're more of a senior leader, like there's I think a lot of pressure to like have conviction and like have a strong vision. And so I'm curious, like, have you had to sort of balance those different things, and like, how do you do so, if so?
Yeah. I guess I think of it more so as, okay, what are the core things I need to do to hit my goals? Because I think what happens as you become more senior at a company is you honestly have more accountability like more responsibility, more numbers on your head, but you have way less control. And so like I can't actually do the work as much, or else I'm disempowering someone. And so I try and really double down and focus and have a really strong conviction in that world, and be kind of it's like a combination of tops down and bottoms up. I want to have that vision and that conviction, but I also want to get the feedback of the people around me. And I think that is like the number one like battlefield area that I'm playing in. But then my own creativity and just like desire is also, I like doing experimental things. And so I try and put a different hat on times, and whether it's a day a week or after work or something, where I try and do things that are maybe a little out of the box, a little experimental things that, and in those roles, if it pays off, awesome. There's like big asymmetric upside, but there's no downside because people might not even know I'm working on it. So it's kind of how I think about it a little bit.
Nice, thanks, Alex. Bernard, Christian jumped off. I'm losing my marbles here in the chat. Bernard, you had a question about how generalists can market themselves better. Do you want to hop in?
Yes, I just have to find it in the chat first.
Oh, I can read it if you don't have it.
Yeah, please.
Great. Okay. How might we design prompt? How might we, as generalists, better market ourselves in a world where people seem to be overly focused on concrete skills? I've been trying to explicitly evangelize this other dimension of hypergrowth mentality beyond concrete skills. How do we get people to better recognize this dimension that doesn't seem to be as commonly assessed versus the skills piece? And
yeah,
Bernard, do you mean by that? Do you mean like, sorry,
yeah,
go ahead.
I can elaborate a bit more about that part. So the world around us seems to be very focused on evaluating concrete skills. And like they say, oh, if you don't have such and such skills, like I've run into many cases. I actually talked to someone today who's trying to pivot into PM but has mostly the engineering background. And then this person, like talking to other companies, can't make any progress applying to other companies as a PM because they don't have any experience, right? So, it's like, but there's another dimension of like being able to learn things quickly that we can market ourselves at, that companies should be better at assessing and like recognizing.
Yeah. I mean, I think like, again, it's hard to go to a company and say, I'm a generalist, hire me, because when someone's thinking of a job description, like they're thinking of a specific role most of the time that they want that person to play. And there's different, like things that violate that role, but that's generally how I think about. That being said, I think if I was a generalist, the way I would make myself more marketable, a couple different ways. One is have like you've done things in your career, right? And you've had different skills. And so I would have like multiple resumes, right? Like you can, in theory, have a resume that positions you for one style of job or another style of job. Like even for myself, as I think of a generalist within marketing, I could craft a resume that would be like really B2B SaaS focused, or really brand focused, or for a nonprofit or advocacy. And so I would, as you think about applying jobs, looking at your own skills, because you have skills, right? And then developing your resume accordingly. Because like you need to have a skill, like just saying I'm a high growth learner is probably not enough. You need to express that in a specific area. Now, what you can do, like if I wanted to break into product management, I would apply my high growth learner mindset and just start doing that work online. So I would start a blog or a website that either wrote about product management, or a YouTube series that talked about product management, or put together fake specs for a project. And I think you do that enough, you show it enough online, and over time people can kind of see that you know what you're talking about there.
Thanks, Alex. We've got a couple questions about your coach. One is, how did you find your coach, really quickly, and then follow-up question about other personal growth vehicles there. I'll let you finish that.
Yeah, found the coach through Jack, founder, and like our VCs. And so if you're at a venture-backed business, I'm sure they have a wide network there, but there's a lot of coaches available these days as well. So that's how we found Francois.
So aside from Francois, how has Lattice feedback and the way that you have used it impacted how you lead your team?
Yeah. It's a good question. I think a couple ways. One is I always know that there's these formal moments to have like a look back, and so I know that these like review cycles are coming. So that's one piece. I always use Lattice for our one-on-ones every week, and so we have really clear, structured conversations that I either put on the agenda or they put on the agenda, and that leads to really productive conversations around people's career growth or around something they are doing wrong. One of my favorite features of Lattice is we have a praise feature, which like spits out praise into a Slack channel, and that's a great way to recognize people who are doing a great job. So that's another way. And then less on the well, I guess it's employee to company feedback, but we run engagement surveys oftentimes where you're, and so that's a great way to understand like the pulse of the team and how they're feeling about different things. And that's been really helpful, especially in COVID, where we're not all sitting together and everyone's far apart, and it's hard to know how people are feeling and how motivated they are and whether I'm doing a good job as a manager or not. And so that feedback I really look at as a gift and something I look forward to when we do those cycles.
Awesome. In our remaining minute, question from Mishti. What, if in your spare time, what, if any, experiments or side projects are you running today? I guess not including the blog, but anything else that you're cooking up?
Yeah, it's a good question. Like, I guess I'm constantly, oh no, did I freeze? Okay, I think I'm back.
You're still here.
Like one thing I'm thinking, the blog is kind of my main side project. I'm also thinking about how do I maybe productize some of that a little bit more. So like a course or something like that. That's like something tossing around in my head. I also love playing in design tools. So I'm a big Figma user, and I am like constantly fiddling and coming up with different products and stuff. So that's nothing is like created or out in the world, but that's like one way I like thinking through ideas. And yeah, like whenever I'm done with Lattice, I will try and start a company, and so I constantly are playing with ideas to try and figure out what that might be.
Well, we will definitely stay tuned for that. And then in closing, thank you so much. And are there any perhaps job openings at Lattice that we should be aware of for folks looking to make their next move? Oh no.
Yeah. Oh, am I there now?
You're back.
Oh no. Okay, sorry. I thought I'd sit next to the modem and it would work. But yeah, go to lattice.com, the careers page. There's a lot of different openings. There's going to be a lot more that are published in Q4. So in the next couple of weeks, there'll be a lot of like marketing roles and stuff on there. So I would just keep an eye out. And the best way to do it is just apply through the job listing. Honestly, even when I send stuff internally, the hiring manager is always like, just tell them to apply through the job listing. And so that's usually the best way. And then the recruiting team can figure it out. So
amazing. Yeah. Thank you so much for joining us. Thanks for everybody who participated with your great questions, and we'll see you all soon.
Sweet. Thanks for having me. It's a lot of fun.
Bye.
Thanks, Alex. Thanks, Kali. Bye,
Thank
everyone.
you, Jen.
Thanks.